G'day, May 40 here. It's the third anniversary of Russia invading Ukraine. And the United States would have done the same thing to a neighboring country if Ukraine did what it did to Russia. All right? Ukraine wanted to ally with Russia's biggest enemy, NATO, the West, the United States. Ukraine became a de facto member of NATO. Yes, they weren't officially a member of NATO, but frequently in life, what is real is more important than what is officially true, right? The way things really work is often more important than how things officially work, right? Sometimes a man and a woman will be married, but the real relationships are going on that are not the official relationships. And Ukraine decided to side with Russia's biggest enemy. As a result, Ukraine got smashed, right? Ukraine did everything necessary to provoke a superpower to smash it. You live next door to a superpower. You don't get your own independent foreign policy. Look what the United States did with Cuba. All right, the United States was prepared to risk nuclear war, in large part to assist John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States, his party's political prospects in midterms. Right, that was a good deal of the reason why JFK was willing to go right up to the brink of nuclear war, because he saw it as being good for the Democrats, right? To risk nuclear war because he saw it as good for the Democrats, right? Nuclear weapons in Cuba did not make the United States more vulnerable, right? At the time, the United States still enjoyed a massive advantage of nuclear weapons vis-a-vis Russia. So it was not a grave national security threat. It's just that, like all other superpowers, the United States holds something that America calls the Monroe Doctrine, but China and Russia have the equivalent of the Monroe Doctrine. And the Monroe Doctrine says we will not accept outside interference in our realm of influence, the Americas. And so when Russia put weapons into Cuba, right, U.S. went ballistic. Right, we were ready. We had generals. We had Curtis LeMay, the head of the Air Force, ready to launch a nuclear attack on Cuba. So what Vladimir Putin did in Ukraine was quite mild compared to what many of the American elite at the time wanted to launch against Cuba. Now, America would have done the same sort of thing in the similar situation to Ukraine as Russia did to Ukraine. But America's rhetoric would have been different. America would have talked about how they are fighting for freedom. We are fighting for peace-loving people. We are fighting for Western civilization. Right? America uses a whole bunch of beautiful words and lovely rhetoric, if you're into this kind of thing, when America goes to war and starts slaughtering people. Now, America didn't go to war in World War I or in World War II or in Korea or in Vietnam to save democracy. Right? We went for our own interests. In both World War I and World War II, we let other powers just bloody themselves, just slaughter each other in the millions. And then, when it was in our strategic interest to intervene and pay a relatively light price and get an enormous reward, right? We were the decisive factor in both World War I and World War II. And compared to the other major powers, we didn't pay much of a price in terms of the loss of our youth, right, compared to what France and England and Germany and Russia and Soviet Union suffered, and Japan. But with a moderate expenditure of lives, we got enormous power in the world. And anyone who comes into the Americas and tries to mess with American foreign policy, right, you're very likely to get absolutely smashed. All right, let me see how things are going here.
Now, this is the start of week 6 of President Trump's second term, and the best way to describe the policy so far, unabashedly pro-American.
We got one badass president now who's going to come in and going to take care of this border.
The fundamental goal is we want your children and grandchildren to be able to raise a family in security and comfort in the country that we all love.
He gave us a clear directive, make America safe. And that's what we're going to do.
We're at a level, I don't think we've been at this level maybe ever as the Republican Party. We're a bigger, better, stronger party than ever before. More people in our party than ever before. But the people have given us a resounding mandate for dramatic change in Washington, and we are going to deliver it. We're going to use it, and we're going to make America great again by using it.
And he got a resounding reception at CPAC over the weekend. And our friend and pollster, Mark Penn, he released a big survey today showing that by a 58-42 margin, voters believe Trump is doing a better job than Biden. Now, overall, Trump's job approval is at 52, but his two major domestic policies, the border and cutting waste, are extremely popular. Ditto for Trump's emphasis on merit over DEI and hiring. But what's the Democrats' agenda? Well, resisting and repeating their same old tired lines.
He's modeling everything upon this autocratic, authoritarian, dictatorial, king-like presence that he wants to play inside of our government.
There's been one through line with Donald Trump. It has been his willingness to do Vladimir Putin's bidding.
He's going after critical jobs to save pennies in order to give himself more room to give big tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans and the wealthiest.
So that's what they got. That's it. That's what they got. I haven't heard any of that stuff before. Now, while a majority of voters don't agree with Trump on every policy, what's key is that they do feel much more optimistic about America and the economy. It was in the low 30s, remember, for years. And while Congress remains underwater, the Democrats are in real trouble.
I think you're seeing a retrospective assessment of Biden and the direction the Democratic Party was going. It really a lot more negative than it was on Election Day. And they're looking at the contrast on immigration, on economic policy, on some of the social policies. And boy, they're reevaluating. In the Democratic Party, I have never seen anything like this. This is a record low for the Democratic Party in terms of favorability. It has fallen really way down, and I don't think there's any leadership right now that's going to be able to bring that back.
Now, how do you resurrect your party, though? By protecting red tape and the bureaucracy, by trying to gin up sympathy for federal workers who need to get real jobs in the real world like most of America. Ever heard of it? Now, do Democrats really think that Americans will stop liking Trump?
So I hope you're enjoying this experience of streaming in much higher quality. All right, I switched from 30 frames per second to 60 frames per second. I switched from live streaming at 2500 bit rate to 8000 bit rate. I mean, are you enjoying this high quality experience? Right, this is the Luke Ford Show at an intensity, at a high definition, at an audio quality, at a visual quality, at a streaming quality, at an intellectual quality, at a moral quality, at a cultural quality, at an energetic quality that you have never experienced before. So much talk about Zelensky being a dictator, right? Well, any country under attack can only be led by a dictator, right? The more severe the emergency, the more of a dictator you're going to have. Ukraine's in a real emergency. My emotional sympathies are 100% with Ukraine, right? In my head, I think about, well, Ukraine did these things of trying to ally with the West, trying to ally with Putin's enemies. But in my heart, in my emotions, I just completely side with Ukraine, right? In my emotions, I think, oh, Zelensky's a great guy. He's leading his people in a very difficult time. But you can only lead in this kind of emergency. You can only have a viable government if it's a type of dictatorship, right? All the democracy stuff and the civil liberties and the civil rights and all these things that you just may think are essential to life and that we were just born with certain inalienable rights, these are all luxury goods. Democracy is a luxury good. Civil liberties are a luxury good. The First Amendment is a luxury good. Every amendment, every civil liberty is a luxury good. When your people are fighting for survival, all right, they will be willing to jettison, suspend every civil liberty, right? Every democratic procedure. You don't normally get elections during a time of war. So, yeah, Trump is right. Zelensky's a dictator, just like Churchill was a dictator for Great Britain, and France in World War I, they didn't have elections, right? Ukraine not having elections, not unusual, of course. You're only going to get dictatorship in times of extreme emergency. And we got through COVID, but it was an unprecedented influenza attack. And so all sorts of rights that people took for granted just got snatched away because we entered a state of emergency. When things get tough, all right, the normal privileges of living in a democracy with civil liberties, right, they just go away. And there's absolutely no alternative to that. Any nation state that wants to survive is going to have to take away liberties and expand the powers of the executive. Not the powers so much usually of the legislature, not so much the powers of the judiciary, not so much the independent powers of independent federal agency. Right? When times get tough, right, people look to the executive. The American president embodies the United States of America, and people look to the American president to take care of them, whether it's an economic emergency, a health emergency, a fiscal emergency, a cultural emergency, whatever the nature of the emergency. People don't look to the minority speaker in the House. They don't look to the majority speaker of the U.S. Senate. They don't look to the 9th District judges. Right? They look to the President of the United States. Right? We live in a constitutional dictatorship, and necessity knows no law. Right? When the need is severe enough, no law is going to impinge on the dictator or the leader, the executive, the president. Right? Necessity knows no law. A stiff prick has no conscience. Right? So you don't want to get raped. Right? Don't be with someone with a stiff prick who is in erotic state of exception and who believes that he is the sovereign of that situation, and you're someplace where your screams can't be heard. Right? So be aware of the stiff prick and the erotic state of exception. Right? If you go to law school, you don't learn about this, right? When you go to civics classes, you don't learn about this. But America, like every other functioning democracy, is in part a constitutional dictatorship. And in times of emergency, in times of extremis, right, the dictator will come out, right? The sovereign will announce himself, just like the miracle in theology. Right, the sovereign is he who decides, who notices and points out and decides and states we are in a state of exception. Now, why is Donald Trump so nice to Vladimir Putin? Well, one reason is Vladimir Putin is the most effective leader of a major nation state over the past 25 years. Right, he took Russia from being a basket case and restored it to among the world's great powers. So why are guys nicer to beautiful young women rather than old hags? Right? Because they want to have sex with beautiful young women. Even if they're not going to have sex, it's just really good for the neshama. It just feels great for the soul. It feels good for your psychology. It just makes you happy to be around beautiful young women and to have verbal intercourse with beautiful young women, right? To have that verbal intercourse privilege. It's a beautiful thing, and it makes you happy. And so people are going to be really nice to beautiful people. And people are going to be really nice to powerful people. Whoa, Cyberview, $12.34. Luke, take this and buy yourself some SMST if it's trading at $6.66. What is SMST? You know what I really need to buy myself? I need to buy myself new shirts. These shirts I wear, they're all the same size. They're all the same type. But they're just way too tight because my chest keeps expanding as I keep expanding my workout. And so my shirts are trying to hold me back, but I have to be free. I got to break free. And these shirts, they're just way too tight. When I come back from some occasion where I have to wear a nice collared shirt, and then I hang on that old tree branch and start doing pull-ups, it just busts the buttons in my shirt. They just pew, pew, pew. They're just flying off. It's a public health emergency. It's a threat to the vulnerable, to the mentally ill, to the crazy, to the homeless, to those people just Torah-loving, Torah-observing Jews just walking by, and I got to watch out. I can't be like cranking out the pull-ups or the push-ups on a tree branch when I'm wearing a shirt like this, because the shirt just gets stretched and threatens to burst, and buttons will be flying everywhere. It's bad for the environment, bro. And it's embarrassing for all those other people who are not capable of these kind of athletic feats. They see a man of 58 years of age just cranking on the pull-ups on a tree branch, and the shirt's stretched and the buttons flying everywhere, and it's damaging to the self-esteem of the fat and the feeble. And the fat and feeble, they're our fellow citizens too. We can't just ignore and have contempt for the fat and the feeble, unless it's really funny. Okay, so why is Donald Trump so nice to Putin? Because Putin is formidable. He is tough. He is the most effective leader of a major power that we've seen in this world in the past 25 years. Zelensky is not formidable. Ukraine is not formidable. Right? They don't matter much. So Putin and Trump, U.S. and Russia, they can just settle this war in Ukraine. Right? Europe doesn't matter. Europe is like that weak, nerdy kid who's just kind of standing there watching me crank pull-ups on a tree branch. All right, Europe is weak. Europe is pusillanimous. Europe doesn't matter much. Europe's got a great history, right? They've got some great architecture, but they're feeble. They're weak. And so you don't get to have power if you're feeble and you're weak. So a lot of talk on the morning meeting about why would Trump call Zelensky a dictator? And number one reason, he is a dictator, and that's no slam on Zelensky, no slam on Ukraine. Any nation in Ukraine's situation can only effectively be led by a dictator. Absolutely no choice.
Goes after the Republicans, where she said Trump falsely claims that Zelensky's a dictator. So I actually went down the rabbit hole, and I started to look down definition and who gets classified and what. And you can expand a definition, and obviously you can use it in a hyperbolic way. But if Zelensky canceled elections in Ukraine and refused to stand for re-election, Russia has elections. But here's my question. Where's the line between a guy who has elections that we know are 100% rigged, who kills his opponents, and Zelensky who cancels them?
But here's the thing, Sean. If he wants to call Zelensky a dictator, he's got to call Putin a dictator.
No. I'm not. That's not what I'm asking you.
I know it's not what you're asking, but I'm in.
No, why? Why does he have to do it? Because that would be fair. That would be the true thing to do. That would be the nice thing to do. That would be the empathic thing to do. That would be the caring thing to do. Right? The world does not run on fairness. The world does not run on the basis of truth. Right? He's trying to reach a deal with the most formidable leader of a major power in the last 25 years, and to facilitate that deal, he shows him respect. Just like if you're saying you will show your boss a considerable amount of respect if you want to keep your truth. Right? You don't get to be a mod on this channel being a weak bitch. Right? If you blow a weak didgeridoo, you do not get to be a mod. Sorry.
I'm answering your question. Where's the line? The line is they're both neither of them is Thomas Jefferson. They both have real problems in how they've governed. Both have.
Oh my God. Thomas Jefferson is not Thomas Jefferson. People are just so naive. The public discourse on these matters is just such weak tea. Right, Thomas Jefferson is not Thomas Jefferson in this portrayal. All right. Here's a letter from Thomas Jefferson to John Colvin, September 20, 1810. Thomas Jefferson writes, "The question you propose, where the circumstances do not sometimes occur, which make it a duty in officers of high trust to assume authorities beyond the law, is easy of solution in principle, sometimes embarrassing in practice. In other words, in situations of emergency, in situations of necessity, there is no law. A strict observance of the written laws is doubtless one of the high duties of a good citizen. It is not the highest. Right? Being a Torah observant Jew is not the highest thing that you can do as a Jew. It is to use your Torah observance in a way that makes this world a better place. Right? You can observe Jewish law and be a total a-hole and a jerk and an embarrassment. Okay, the laws of necessity, of self-preservation, of saving our country when in danger, are of a higher obligation. Right? The law of necessity is a higher obligation than the California Penal Code. The law of self-preservation is of a higher obligation than what you're going to get taught in law school or at the DMV. The law of saving your country when your country is in danger is a higher obligation than any law on the books. To lose our country by a scrupulous adherence to written law would be to lose the law itself with life, liberty, property, and all those who are enjoying them with us, thus absurdly sacrificing the ends to the means. Right? To protect the country, to protect our law, to protect our freedoms, to protect our civil liberties, to protect our way of life, you have to suspend civil liberties and laws and procedures and democracies. And in times of necessity, you don't allow the law to get in the way of what you need to do to survive. And telling me about the Constitution doesn't allow us to do this. Right? Japanese tell me this all the time. The Constitution does not allow us to properly defend ourselves. We just have to rest under the American nuclear umbrella. The Americans impose this Constitution on us. What are we to do? Look, the Constitution is not a death sentence. Right? Necessity knows no law. Thomas Jefferson is not Thomas Jefferson in this portrayal here. Right? Thomas Jefferson recognizes that necessity knows no law, that in times of emergency, we need a dictator.
Deal with corruption, etc. But you cannot, if you're trying to be fair and set a good example for children, you cannot.
What's this about the president needs to be fair and set a good example for our children? Right? And the most important task for the president of the United States, being fair is not in the top 10, and being a good example for our children is not in the top 10. Right? This is an incredibly naive, bizarre, weak conception of the obligations of a president. The number one obligation of a president is to protect his people and future generations of his people and to provide them the ability to prosper.
Call Zelensky a dictator and then refuse.
No, and I'm not disputing that. I was intrigued by where that line, because there's obvious dictators, right? There's Kim Jong-un, people who literally don't face opposition, and then there's ones who.
The revered John F. Kennedy. He risked descending into a nuclear war with the Soviet Union in large part to better his political party's prospects at the next election. Right? Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet Union dictator, he was removed from power because of how he dealt with the Cuban Missile Crisis. So these awful dictatorships like the Soviet Union, right, the people in charge are often held accountable. All sorts of dictators have been held accountable.
Fake it, which is what Russia is, because they're not real elections.
So Zelensky has, under the laws of the state, of the country, Zelensky has the right to not hold elections during the war.
And that has, by the way, been common throughout the world, that during wars, people suspend laws.
Yeah.
Okay, so many discussions about, oh my God, Trump called Zelensky a dictator. And oh my God, he's not Thomas Jefferson. So I've been reading a racy 1948 book on this topic. So my favorite topic on and off over the past few years, but in particular over the past week, is constitutional dictatorship. And there's a great book by that very title that was published in 1948 by Clinton Rossiter, Constitutional Dictatorship, Crisis Government in the Modern Democracies. And so a new edition of this book was released at the end of 2001. Why at the end of 2001? Because after 9/11, we recognize that normal laws and procedures are simply not going to cut it. So how shall we be governed during the war on terror? So just even admitting that there's a war on terror, you're buying in to the president's description of reality. That was the gayest, the weakest, the stupidest, the most idiotic framing for the situation. We're in a war on terror. Right? Terror is a process. Terror is a procedure. Right? There's just no end, no beginning, no clarity. War on terror. What a stupid, gay, idiotic thing from a stupid, idiotic president like George W. Bush. And to accept that framing shows that you're not particularly sharp. Right? Our problem after 9/11 wasn't terror. It was particular terrorists, Al-Qaeda, and our inability to control immigration. Right? If we just shut our borders instead of invading the Middle East, we would have been far better off. Existing government practices comprehensively fail to protect the people and cannot be continued. Well, sometimes it's the practices, and sometimes it's the people with the practices. So sometimes you give more power to a good, capable person, and that's fantastic for your people and your nation state. Other times you give the same power to someone who's diabolical or just ill-suited for the task, and it's a terrible thing. So it's not necessarily all about practices. It was in the application of our practices. George W. Bush campaigned in 2000 against identifying people boarding airplanes on the basis of being Muslim, right? He was very upset by Arabs being racially profiled when they're about to board airplanes. So if we just have some common sense security and some common sense immigration enforcement, we wouldn't have had to waste $7 trillion invading Afghanistan and Iraq and launching this war on terror and starting up all these multiple government agencies like the Department of Homeland Security. Since we've been forced to face the horrors of terror attacks on the United States, we need to consider the sort of government such a war will force us to adopt. It wasn't a war. We chose to call it a war. We allowed George W. Bush to frame our emergency as a war. It wasn't a war. It was a matter of law enforcement. And there were wise people like Mickey Kaus in the aftermath of 9/11 who said framing this as a war on terror or as a civilizational war is stupid, it's wrong, it's not effective. It's a matter of immigration enforcement and law enforcement. And that's how it should have been dealt with, not as a civilizational crisis or some gay, dripping with AIDS war on terror. No form of government can survive that excludes dictatorship when the life of the nation is at stake. Right, that's Clinton Rossiter. Listen to that again. No form of government can survive that excludes dictatorship when the life of the nation is at stake. Saving the country, saving your people, saving the nation, that is the highest obligation. That necessity knows no law. And dictatorships can be constitutional. You don't hear that in civics. You don't hear that in law school. But every functioning democracy contains constitutional dictatorship. Right? Constitutional dictatorship is an absolutely indispensable factor in maintaining a constitutional democracy. Though Roosevelt's Attorney General Francis Biddle was asked later whether the Japanese internment decision was a difficult one for Roosevelt. He explained he did not think the constitutional difficulty plagued him. Why not? Because in matters of necessity, right, the law does not figure. Right? The Constitution did not bother the wartime president. Right? That was a question of law which ultimately the Supreme Court must decide, and the Supreme Court is not going to go against necessity in a time of war. Right? We must get on with the war. Thomas Jefferson wasn't Thomas Jefferson. He did not have authority under the Constitution to buy the Louisiana Territory. He did it. He bought it, even though he didn't have the authority under the Constitution, because it was a necessity. It was essential for America's future. And Napoleon's difficulties gave us an opportunity that might never be repeated. Right. American law schools and civics classes teach us the U.S. Constitution is never suspended. It is at all times in full force and effect. Problem with this is it is not true. Right. We have elites and law schools and civics teachers telling us that Supreme Court rhetoric rather than historical truth is what's really going on. Right, they're essential principles of constitutional dictatorship. We've got a complex system of government, and our system of government is designed to function under normal, peaceful conditions. It's not designed to function under times of great crisis. Right, civil liberties, democracy, all that stuff that you're taught is just quintessentially American. That's for the good times, right? That stuff goes away during the bad times. Russia invading Ukraine, that's the state of nature. That's how the world has worked for thousands of years. The strong take what they want, the weak endure what they must. That's the law of the jungle. That's how the world works. That's more true to reality than the post-World War II era of a liberal world order enforced and protected by the United States. That's very much the exception. Generally speaking, in the world, life operates along the lines of Russia invading Ukraine. So we are incredibly blessed, fortunate, spoiled in the United States that even when we were poor and depressed, we could still drive to the poorhouse. In a time of crisis, all right, our liberties go away, and we give power to the executive to do what is necessary to restore peace and tranquility. This always means a stronger government, and when the government gets stronger, the people have fewer rights. Right? The government doesn't get stronger and the people have more rights. It doesn't work that way. And it's not the government in general. It's the executive, the president. So you'll have martial law, you'll have executive legislation, you'll have the suspension of civil rights. So you never have a constitutional government that never has to invoke essentially a dictatorship. And then after the dictatorship is suspended, right, after the COVID lockdowns and the COVID restrictions were taken away, right, government is never the same after that. Right? After you've passed through a phase of constitutional dictatorship, it doesn't just reset completely to zero, right? You get all those rights back, but the government has changed and society has changed. Right? You've had a permanent alteration in the aggrandizement of the power of the state. The United States, after COVID, has had a permanent alteration in the aggrandizement of the power of the state. We have it so good in the United States. We should be grateful to the powers that be in America during COVID because they were more right than wrong. We should be grateful to the Federal Reserve. We should be grateful for various stimulus packages that enabled the economy to rebound so quickly. And yeah, pragmatically, the COVID denialists played an important role in Trump's victory. So pragmatically, I'm happy about that. But we have it so good. We're so blessed that with all our problems in the United States, we should be grateful for the relative ease with which we got through COVID and how the people who govern us did a better than expected job. Now, the war on terror, right? One of the many problems with that is it's vague, it's open-ended, right? It sends us on a permanent war footing, right? It's completely different from any of the emergencies analyzed by Clinton Rossiter, right? You had a government by default rather than design, moving outside its normal constitutional responsibilities, and people by 2005, 2006, they stopped buying in that this war on terror was the number one emergency facing the nation. So think about the government of the United States, which led the American people through the Second World War. This is Clinton Rossiter. This is such a racy, fun read. So the United States won World War II, and we did it by suspending all sorts of civil liberties and by building up a much stronger government and a much stronger executive. And we had a government that resorted to actions that would be seen as unconstitutional, undemocratic, and dictatorial if we weren't fighting a world war. But because we were in a situation of war, these actions seemed necessary and proper, and the American people overwhelmingly supported them. If Donald Trump had been more restrictive in his COVID policies, he probably would have won re-election, because in a time of crisis, people want to be reassured that the government, meaning the executive, the president, is taking strong measures to protect the people. So there are all sorts of unusual government procedures during World War II, where only because we were in an all-out war were they accepted by the people. Yet, Price Control Act. So Congress handed over the power to set prices to the president. You had a destroyer deal in which the president ignored all sorts of laws to get ships to Great Britain. You had strict control and regulation of America's free economy by all sorts of government agencies. You had the direct invasion upon the freedom of individuals by rationing, by the draft, by confiscatory levels of taxes, by military martial law rule in Hawaii. You had the forcible removal of tens of thousands of American citizens from their home on the Pacific coast. You had the arbitrary suppression of seditious words and periodicals of many other American citizens. You had the Army seize Montgomery Ward. The United States government demonstrated that to maintain its own existence, it could do anything necessary. It could possess and wield dictatorial power. And then it went away, right? And normal life resumed, but there was still something latent in the Leviathan that was created. Leviathan is that book by Thomas Hobbes, who says that the state of nature, life is so nasty, brutish, and short in the state of nature that we need an all-powerful Leviathan to protect us. And so this is in the 17th century, right? Let's look at some pictures of a Leviathan. Right? Leviathan is not some timid creature, right? A Leviathan is a big, scary creature. You find Donald Trump a big, scary creature right now. Well, that is the American presidency. It has been designed to be a big, scary creature. The government of the United States, the president of the United States, will essentially do anything it considers necessary to guide us through emergencies. And the emergency may be one largely created by the government. The war on terror, right? No such thing existed. It was just a gay, stupid framing, but people took it as real for years and years and years, right? The president of the United States has a lot of latitude for defining reality for people who don't think very clearly. Right, civil liberties, free enterprise, capitalism, abiding by the Constitution, government by debate and compromise, voting. These are all strictly luxury products. Only a tiny percentage of governments since the dawn of history have had these things. The things that we take for granted, they're all luxury products, and in hard times, they're going to start going away. Right? Democracy is a child of peace. Democracy is a child of peace that cannot live apart from its mother. War contradicts everything that democracy implies. War cannot be democratic. Life is not democratic. Almost nothing in life runs on democratic means and principles. So that democratic way of life, that's the stupidest, gayest expression because it doesn't work that way. Nobody lives a democratic way of life. So while we were fighting World War II, right, there was a lot of rhetoric from our government and other Western governments that this was a fight between dictatorship and democracy. And while we're using that rhetoric, we are admitting in practice the 100% absolute complete necessity of becoming dictatorial, of our government becoming dictatorial to defeat dictatorship and preserve democracy and freedom. Right? When people are dealing with fires, with floods, with droughts, with earthquakes, with riots, with influenzas, with great strikes, right? These tend to be dealt with by government using dictatorial methods. Right? Wars are not won by free and open and fair debate. Right? Rebellions are not suppressed by judges handing down rulings. Right? 12 million unemployed people don't get jobs through a scrupulous regard for the tenets of free enterprise. Right? The hardships caused by earthquakes and tornadoes and by eruptions of nature are not mitigated by just letting nature take its course. Right? The government will always meet crisis by assuming more power in the executive, in the presidency, and respecting fewer rights. Things get tough, you're going to have fewer rights. Now, all these dictatorial actions are going to be carried on in America and in the West in the name of freedom, right? If America was in anything like the situation that Russia was in when it invaded Ukraine, right, America would smash its neighbor, but we would talk about, oh, we're just doing this to preserve freedom, right? The bigger the emergency, the more absolute and dictatorial will be the governmental response, and our institutions will become dictatorial. And we'll do that so that freedom and civil liberties and constitutional democracy shall not perish from the earth. So we have to become dictatorial and authoritarian, right? The only way you can fight fire sometimes is with fire. The only way you can effectively defeat a dictator is by becoming dictatorial. The only way you can destroy autocracy is with autocracy. The only way you can defeat violence is with violence. Right? The only way you can crush dictators is with dictatorship. And all constitutional countries use constitutional dictatorship. Right? We can have martial law any times. Right? When a crisis has completely disrupted the normal working of government, right? Sometimes the military and law enforcement, the only powers remaining that can restore public order and secure our citizens. So in times of crisis, we, as people, as legislators, as Americans, we transfer our power and authority from the legislature and the courts largely to the president, right? In most crises, particularly economic depressions and war, right, the legislature and the judicial branch are not equal to the task of dealing with emergencies, and so they hand over effectively their functions to someone who is better qualified to enact arbitrary crisis procedures. So whenever you get this crisis expansion of power, you get a crisis expansion of power in the executive branch, in the presidency, and you always get a matching crisis contraction of liberty. Right? The law of necessity is the highest law. Right? The law of necessity means that we will often need extra-constitutional, illegal emergency action. Right? In every free nation-state, its rulers became dictatorial because they were dealing with some grave national crisis, and so they swung into emergency mode, and there was no sanction in law, no sanction in the Constitution or in custom or from the legislative or judicial branches which were going to hold them back. Abraham Lincoln was the closest that any American president has come to being a dictator. Lincoln said, "Every man thinks he has a right to live, and every government thinks it has a right to live. Every man, when driven to the wall by a murderous assailant, will override all laws to protect himself." Right? If you're fighting for your life, you'll override all laws to protect yourself. And this is called the great right of self-defense. So, too, every government, when driven to the wall by a rebellion, will trample down a constitution before it will allow itself to be destroyed. This may not be constitutional. This may not be legal. It's just a fact. Right? The law is made for us. It's made for the freedom and prosperity of the people. The law is made for the state. The state is not made for the law. The people are not made for the law. If you have to choose between the law and the people, the law and the state, right, the law must be sacrificed for the people and for the state. And it's always going to be the executive branch in the United States that is going to possess and wield the extraordinary powers of self-preservation. So dictatorship is a phenomenon that intrigues almost all ordinary readers of history and almost no students of law and politics. That's a pretty good line. Clinton Rossiter. This is such a racy book.
Because he fires these people?
I felt absolutely infuriated getting this email with a demand within 48 hours to provide a response on what I did within the last week or face termination. This is clearly an attempt from Elon Musk to harass and bully and intimidate the federal workforce, which is part of his broader plan to gut the federal workforce and privatize public sector services.
Now, making a list of what you accomplished in a week, that's what she was whining about, is harassment and bullying? Of course, because that requires, 15 minutes of work? Now, these are the same types who think requiring them to return to the office where they haven't been, oftentimes for 4 years, that basically amounts to a hate crime.
I thought it was great because we have people that don't show up to work and nobody even knows if they work for the government. So by asking the question, tell us what you did this week, what he's doing is saying, are you actually working? What they're doing is they're trying to find out who's working for the government. Are we paying other people that aren't working? And, where's all that? Where's the money gone?
Now, not only is that not unfair to insist on accountability and fiscal sanity in government, but it's also deeply patriotic. Because Trump and his team are showing their love for America. Just like moms and dads try to stick to a budget, they try to save money, try to make money for their family. Trump wants the same for America at every level. But what the D.C. Uniparty has done for decades has been deeply unpatriotic. Printing, borrowing, and spending money like there's no tomorrow. Never changing course. The result ultimately being, if they kept going the way they were going, a total collapse of the American system. That's what Elon Musk has been talking about. But Trump and his team, they celebrate America by embracing sweeping reforms.
The dark days of high taxes, crushing regulations, rampant inflation, flagrant corruption, government weaponization, and total incompetence. Those days are over. They're over.
So as soon as Rome became a constitutional republic, right, that's when they were often compelled to become to install a dictatorship, right? It was only after the establishment of the republic in Rome that the rulers of this new Rome were compelled by various emergencies to go back to the discredited monarchical form of government, because it was the only means of saving the state from extinction. So the same men who drove the kings out of Rome and who set up a constitutional government were now forced to admit in practice that this new government was inadequate to the task of saving itself, and that only a temporary retreat to kingly power would enable it to carry through to normal times. So in the constitutional scheme of Rome, the unitary executive was completely alien to the normal scheme of government. Right, the constitutional history of Rome was all about the weakening of executive power until times came too tough and they realized they could only survive with a dictator. Now, normally, Rome was ruled during its constitutional phase by the Senate, and the advice of the Senate was really disregarded by any Roman official until we hit a time of emergency. So the Roman Republic and Roman dictatorship reached their peak at the same time, right? They grew together side by side, right? Constitutional democracy, a republic, if you can save it, right, is going to rise together with constitutional dictatorship, right? They're going to match each other. All right, heroic, extraordinary, ruthless government action is often going to be necessary to protect and preserve your people and your state. The Weimar Republic, right, they had a very difficult time. Only through the dictatorial powers provided in Article 48 did the Weimar Republic even last, 12 years? So the government in the Weimar Republic, it was dictatorial, it was authoritative, it was harsh, but it was in a very difficult place because a third of the country was leaning towards the communists, a third of the country was leaning towards the Nazis, and the only way to get things done was through authority and dictatorship. And France, think about all the times that France has been invaded in the past 250 years. So France set up martial law, but they called it the law of siege. So you had a law in 1849 that authorized the military to invade the sanctity of the French home, because you can't fight if you preserve and protect and respect the sanctity of the French home. You're going to lose, right? Freedom of assembly, right? You cannot gather together with your fellow citizens to discuss controversial subjects, right? Largely true during parts of COVID as well. In a time of emergency, all those things that you take for granted, such as freedom of assembly, they're just going to get ripped away. Was there a Roman equivalent of Elon Musk? I don't know enough. But I love the 2 Gladiator movies. Freedom of the press. So in the French-German War of 1870, the Germans derived much valuable military and diplomatic information from French newspapers. So by the time World War I came along, right, the leaders of France said, we're not going to have that anymore. So liberty of the press was severely restricted. Freedom of person, freedom of movement, freedom of trade. Right? In a severe war, you're going to get severe administrative and military restrictions on the freedom of citizens to travel and to pursue the normal pleasures of civilian life. Right? So if you're trying to survive, everything else must be subordinated. Absinthe. I'm not a drinker, but I assume it's a high alcohol drink. It can drive a man crazy. Crazy men are a nuisance when public order must be maintained. Therefore, the freedom of Frenchmen to indulge in absinthe was suspended for the duration of World War I. The rights of labor, right? Not so easy to go on strike when your country is fighting for its survival. So whether it's the prohibition of the sale of absinthe or the postponement of all elections, right, all the departures from the normal pattern of French civil and political liberty were absolutely necessary for France to survive World War I. So you're wondering, what do the good people of Commentary Magazine have to say these days?
I would say here's how the Trump administration and how the right views this, which is that the groups that you're talking about, these nonprofit groups that may be affected by some of the canceled contracts, there's no cost politically because those groups are not on the right. You're not alienating your own voters. You may energize the opposition, which is half the country, and so that would have some political costs, especially when you think about down the line in the 2026. But you're not actually hurting your own voters. I was having a conversation with a colleague about some contracts that have been canceled in the education space, and I was asking my colleague, the people receiving the money, I'm sure they're on the left, right? And he said, they're so far to the left that your woke New York Times reading grandma would think that they're to the left.
Right.
And so that type of story is not going to affect public opinion.
I totally
What you're talking
agree.
about is if farm subsidies are cut,
if
VA payments are cut, if Social Security and Medicare is cut. And that's, I think that's when Trump and the Republicans will say enough.
But
right now they don't feel that. They don't feel any pressure.
Okay, so we all know that NIH, the CDC, the organizations within the Department of Health and Human Services misbehaved terribly during COVID, right? We know that they were authoritarian, they were awful, they mistreated people, they tried to suppress speech. All of that, and going after them with a 2x4 is very emotionally satisfying. And on the other hand,
Welcome to Jesse Waters Prime Time tonight.
We're doing another thing. If they don't report for work, we're firing them. That's another scam. If I'm staying home, my golf handicap would get down to very low number. I'd try and get on tour.
The Elon Musk order that's making everyone go crazy.
I couldn't stand it. Don't get angry. Donald, don't get angry, please.
This chapter will be written not simply by whoever occupies the Oval Office. The American story will be written by you.
Kamala gets a participation trophy.
Because the fight is worth it.
I'm coming to Boston. I'm bringing hell with me.
Homan and the Democrats on a collision course.
If I offend anybody today, I don't give a
Plus.
Why wasn't Joe this busy?
They call him Sleepy Joe, don't they? He must have been asleep.
What'd you do last week? If you work for the federal government and you can't answer that by midnight, you might be getting doged. This weekend, every D.C. bureaucrat got this message in their inbox. Please reply to this email with 5 bullets of what you accomplished last week, with a deadline. And if you don't answer, that's kind of your answer.
I thought it was great because we have people that don't show up to work and nobody even knows if they work for the government. So by asking the question, tell us what you did this week, what he's doing is saying, are you actually working? And then if you don't answer, like you're sort of semi-fired or you're fired, because a lot of people are not answering because they don't even exist.
I can tell you what I did last week. Worked on a federal holiday, plugged Dana's new book, pushed Doge dividend checks, you're welcome, shut down Jessica on the 5, politely, and sold some Fox merch. Cha-ching. Now, I came up with that in 5 minutes. If I had 48 hours like those federal workers do, it would have been even better. But when I was putting together the list, I was inspired. And now I've asked the entire primetime team to send me their 5 bullet points on what they accomplished last week. And the deadline's at 6 a.m. tomorrow. And we're going to send you and show you what their bullet points are tomorrow. And I'll let you know if I fired anybody. Nobody on my team was angry when I sent the email. But for some reason, federal workers are.
Tell us about this email and what it was like receiving it and what you all have talked about after getting it.
Sure. I got this email Saturday afternoon, about 3 p.m., and I felt absolutely infuriated getting this email with a demand within 48 hours to provide a response on what I did within the last week or face termination. This is clearly an attempt from Elon Musk to harass and bully and intimidate the federal workforce.
Putting together a list of accomplishments was maybe the most work some of these bureaucrats did all year. If it's that hard for you to name 5 things you've accomplished in a week, that should tell you something. And if it makes you mad or infuriated that you're being asked, that should also tell you something. Tells me a lot of these federal workers don't want to justify their jobs because they feel they're entitled. And that's a bad attitude. And that attitude's about to change. And was it just me or did that worker sound like she was reading from a script? I think I saw her eyes moving back and forth. And what, has this woman never had a review? If the answer is no, then that's a huge problem. People are getting laid off. Tell me why you should stay. If the CEO of Bank of America asks me, Jesse, what did you accomplish last week? I don't run to CNN and cry and tell the anchor I'm mad. If I've been doing a good job, I'm psyched for the opportunity to present my boss with a list of my amazing accomplishments so I can get a raise and a promotion and keep helping the company. You either have a winning attitude or the attitude of a loser. The winner loves the email. The loser is whiny.
This nonsensical email from Elon Musk acting like we're in kindergarten.
The new Trump administration is reveling in its bare-knuckle approach to governing.
This is so sloppy with the way Elon Musk is handling this.
Why is the media treating these workers like the CEO's spoiled brat son? You know, who comes and goes as he pleases, drinks at lunch, and harasses the secretaries? He's untouchable. We all know the guy. The media is treating the federal workforce like they're untouchable. Oh, you can't make them come to the office. You can't fire them. You definitely can't log into their computers, and you can't email them on a weekend. These are public servants. They're supposed to serve the public. When we ask, how are you serving us? That's an issue. Maybe it's because they're not serving us. They're serving themselves. Journalist Chris Rufo just uncovered a deep state sex chat at the National Security Agency. Chat logs show intel officials were using a chat room to share their fetishes and kinks and brag about getting sex changes. and it goes back 2 years. A transgender sex chat while they were on the clock. When you think about it, this was a taxpayer-funded transgender sex chat. Here's a taste. Viewer warning. This one guy had just had his manhood surgically removed. One of the weirdest things that gives me euphoria is when I pee. I don't have to push anything down to make sure it aims right. Here's another. Getting my blank zapped by a laser was shocking. Fine, I'll just do one more. This one guy's talking about how excited he is that the bulge is gone and he can wear bikinis after his sex change surgeries. I know. And these are intel officials. These people are in charge of guarding the nation's deepest secrets and spying on our enemies. How mentally tough are these people if they're having doctors chop off their body parts and then celebrating it on a work computer? Do you know how easy it is to blackmail somebody like that? Do you know how China or Russia or the Iranians, what they would do if they got their hands on this? First, they'd laugh, but then they'd compromise every single one of these reckless agents. Elon asked, "What did you accomplish at work last week?" "I sexted with my colleagues about pouring hot wax on my nipples." This is what happens when 96% of the federal workforce works from home. They're having sex change surgeries while they're working from home, and their bosses don't even know about it. I bet we paid for those sex change surgeries. And then they're all in the group chat all day. "Hey, how was your operation?" "Mine was great. Still a little sore, but now I can live my own truth."
If you don't report to work, that's another scam. Who the hell, if I'm staying home, let's see, my golf handicap would get down to very low number. You'd be shocked if I told you the real number. But I would be so good, I'd try and get on tour. I would be so good. I'd call up, I'd say, "Listen, I'm really working here. Where are my fluffs? Where are my fluffs?"
The Senate's even being put to work. Majority Leader Thune is making senators work late into the night. And ready? They're working on Fridays now. Yeah. And no surprise, senators are already complaining. They want to go home. Democrat Senator Mark Kelly, also a pilot, says he used to rent a plane and fly himself home every Friday. Alas, he's barely flown on that plane this year. He says, unless I want to do it on the weekend, and that's if I get back on the weekend. We're $36 trillion in debt because of guys like that. And they're complaining they have to work on a Friday. Not even a summer Friday, a Friday in February. USAID's been emptied out. 2,000 workers were just fired. Should have taken the buyout while you had the chance. It does make sense, though. They didn't want to leave because the gravy train was just too thick and tasty. For Haiti alone, USAID doled out $2 billion in contracts. Guess how much of that money actually went to Haiti? 2%. Only 2% of the $2 billion went to where it was supposed to. Half of it went to all of these aid groups based around D.C. You can't give it to Haiti directly. They'd just steal the money. So we're going to give it to all of our liberal friends who won't steal the money, and then they'll give it to Haiti. But they didn't. Are liberals just stealing from poor black people and calling it compassion? A New York Post report says the Red Cross raised $500 million for Haiti. And that money was supposed to build homes for 130,000 people. They built 6. $500 million to build 6 homes in Haiti, where home is not really Mar-a-Lago. And here's a juicy one for you. Meet Latricia Adams. She was an advisor to the Biden White House. How she got that job, I have no idea. The Free Beacon reports that while she was working as a White House advisor, our friend Latricia applied for a contract. And not just any contract, a $20 million contract. This $20 million contract was for environmental justice. And right before Biden leaves office, he gives this $20 million contract to Latricia. Her group, Young, Gifted, and Green, got the $20 million. More like Young, Grifted, and Green. Does Latricia have any background in environmental science? No, not really. 10 years ago, Latricia was a high school Spanish teacher. She has a bachelor's in Spanish. She's based in Memphis, Tennessee, not the greenest city. And you know what Biden does? Biden audits Pete Hegseth. This lady, Latricia, screaming for an audit. We used to prosecute graft at the Department of Justice. I guess we don't anymore. Latricia can just walk out of the White House with $20 million. What did Latricia do with the $20 million? Well, we went to their website. The only thing they did last year was the Black Maternal and Environmental Health Day. They started a holiday. It's April 4th. These people look really legit. This is exactly why Trump wants to go visit Fort Knox.
We have found hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud so far, and we've just started. We're actually going to Fort Knox to see if the gold is there, because maybe somebody stole the gold. Tons of gold.
Finding waste, fraud, and abuse isn't even that hard. You can save money with a stroke of a pen.
ODNI itself is a pretty small organization compared to most other elements. But even in that small organization, getting rid of DEI saved American taxpayers roughly $20 million, literally with the stroke of President Trump's pen.
Not even Nancy Pelosi's Doge-proof. According to reports, Trump's looking to sell off the 18-story Nancy Pelosi federal building in San Francisco. The building's empty because HHS told its employees not to work there anymore because it's too dangerous. Pelosi's building surrounded by homeless, needles, and prostitutes. It's about time America had a house cleaning.
The fraudsters, liars, cheaters, globalists, and deep state bureaucrats are being sent packing. The illegal alien criminals are being sent home. We're draining the swamp and we're restoring government by the people, for the people.
So I still think Trump is winning. All right, I like Doge. Now, he's coming a little bit back down to earth. The laws of political physics are reducing the high that he was on. But Meghan McCain has a new show now on two-way, and she's been talking about how giddy she still feels with Trump in office. Remember, she used to go after Donald Trump very hard, particularly in the summer of 2015 when Trump said that he didn't regard her father, the Senator McCain, as a hero because he was captured. But Meghan McCain, this is her second show on two-way, and it was a lot more fun than the first one.
And every time they rip on these young, I also think it's funny. We all know that Washington's run by a bunch of 20-year-olds, right? Like, you look at Mitch McConnell, and everyone around him is like 21 years old, and they're like, oh, I can't believe Elon Musk is bringing these 21-year-olds. Who have IQs like off the charts? They could run circles around all of us, and I'd consider all of us to be very smart people. And there's just something so rich about it where it's like they're trying to demonize the work he's doing and the kids that are around him that clearly are brilliant minds who are working 24/7, who care about this mission. Elon Musk cares about it. He's obsessed with it in a cool way. When he was backstage, we were talking like I don't know when he sleeps, and guys that operate at that level I'm impressed by them because I could never do it. I don't think I could keep that level of passion up, but like to do what he did with Tesla and have that level of focus, to do what he's done with SpaceX, to have that level of focus, to be able to say, I'm going to have a rocket come down, do something that NASA's never done before, just to even think of the idea of re-landing a rocket after it goes up into orbit is amazing. And so you look at what he's done in his career, it is the same level of focus that he did to do these amazing things that he's now putting towards the government, and they're trying to attack him and undermine him is everywhere they can. And I think for him, he's like, I'm going to throw glasses on and just troll you guys a little bit. And I think he enjoys that aspect of it.
Can I ask you guys, I want to put up this image, number one. So I have friends who work in the government. I'm sure you guys do too, because let's face it, we have swamp friends, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that. But on Saturday evening, an email went out to the office from the Office of Personnel Management from Elon Musk with the subject line, what did you do last week? And then he asked employees to please reply to this email with approximately 5 bullet points of what you would accomplish. And failure to respond will be taken as a resignation. There are federal agencies and supervisors who have instructed their employees not to answer this email.
And they don't respond to work, and they don't go to an office. And they basically it's kind of like the guy in the movie, what was it, Office Space, where it's like he just keeps moving around his cubicle. And he's
what do you do here? It totally reminded me of the movie Office Space for the young people watching. It's a movie that came out in the 90s. It's so good, but sorry, continue. Yeah.
No, but like it's like the guy's like, no one knows what he does here. He's trying to find a stapler, and he's been fired, but he still gets a paycheck. And And I think there was some of that. So that's part of it. The second thing that I was told from somebody that knew about this happening, and I'm not going to use their name because that wouldn't be fair to the conversation we had off the record, was for people that thought this was like some type of inhumane treatment or harassment, or, you need to go to your safe space and cry like a baby and call your attorney or the unions. The United States government just offered every government employee the biggest severance package that I've ever heard of. It would never get offered in the private sector if you wanted to quit your job and not come back to the office. Like, if you look at what they offered, if you wanted to just get out, and the amount of runway they gave you with a paycheck for, how many months was it? The numbers.
It's a lot, yeah.
It was something the private sector could never afford to do, would never do. And so then people are like, oh, I can't believe he did this. I think it was two-part. It was not really a joke. It was to see, do people even know how to log in? And so I think there's just part of this bureaucracy that's like, here's what I do. Mm. And if you don't want to do that, then are you even working? There's a good chance you may not be. So
we have Dean from Ohio who wants to jump. I'll say also the thing that made me it was just a fun. I mean, it wasn't fun. It was actually really hard and intense. But it's just, for me personally, I never thought, and I think you guys both know this, Christine and Ben, and Dean, you don't know me, but I think it was CNN Plus, and then when that blew up, then she went to MSNBC. What she has always been a fan of, if you look at her career, is panel shows. That's why I think she's like, why this person is failing, let's take them off. But let's put people like Simone Sanders on in a panel and have total chaos on a panel instead of just total chaos with one person. She loves panels. She's always been, that's kind of what she's really good at. That's what she likes. So she's now, become recently the president of MSNBC. I think it's interim. I don't know if it's been named forever. But this is clearly her trying to put her stamp on that network. And look, you can't get any worse than Joy Reid. So why not try something else and see if it works? And I don't think it's going to change MSNBC at all. What I do think is changing is the power of the media, mainstream media. NBC does not have the power they used to. CBS doesn't. ABC doesn't. I think it's part of the reason why you're seeing Lester Holt hanging up. He's like, look, I'm not reaching the same number of people I used to. You look at even late night shows. It used to be the holy grail. I think to feel like you were validated and made it if you were a guest on Letterman or Leno. I remember when I made it into a Leno monologue and my phone blew up like someone died. I mean, the next morning I woke up and my phone was like, who died? And it was like, you were in the monologue. And those days are gone. I don't think if any one of us was in the monologue tonight of any of the late night shows, our phones would blow up. We'd get a text or we'd see it maybe on Twitter, on X, but it wouldn't be like it used to be. And so I think you're seeing them lose that power. And so some people are just kind of like, all right, I'm going to sail off into the sunset now. And I don't think MSNBC is going to have a good 4 years like they did in 16 to 20 when their ratings exploded when everybody was hating on Trump. I think the hating Trump has become white noise. Well, I want to say one more thing. There was a time on MSNBC a few years ago when a host did an entire Sunday morning segment. This is not a joke. Google it. Just put Meghan McCain's hair, MSNBC. They did an entire segment on my hair, calling it a cultural appropriation and how it was so offensive. Not to give you guys TMI, my hairstylist here in Washington, D.C. is an incredible, does all these amazing celebrities, does my hair and makeup. She's also a beloved friend of all of ours. Her name's Carmen Curry. It's an honor to work with her. Had I worked at a different company or with different people, or I had been a different person, she could have lost her job over that. And sure. MSNBC doesn't care about stuff like that. And the fact that at any point in time, a network sent a Sunday morning news segment, which by the way, it's feel free to look it up, but it's terrible, talking about my hair. I remember being like, this is not news and this is garbage and it's just punting and being nasty. So I'm not surprised at that. But what I am surprised at is people like Margaret Brennan on CBS, keep making these punts. And for people that don't know, she has been slammed for remarks about the Holocaust. And Steve Krakauer tweeted, it's hard to believe a CBS News host would frame the Holocaust as free speech, was weaponized conduct on a genocide. But this also is the remnants of crusty old legacy media that we're left with in America. He says, my prediction remains that CBS News will not exist by the end of the year. Do you agree with that prediction that CBS won't exist by the end of the year? And why do Republicans keep rewarding CBS by going on? I wouldn't do an interview with Margaret Brennan if there was money involved.
But there was, I did like Vance going on there and saying, I don't really care, Margaret. I mean, this is a weird thing, is social media has turned the most extremely dumb cable news shows into, there's a parasite host relationship. The clips drawn from those, every time Scott Jennings just looks at the camera during a CNN panel, it becomes a meme. And it becomes a meme for a reason. It's because people are kind of craving an authentic response using facts and, sure, people come from different ideological persuasions, but arguing their case and having that voice heard. And it's always, it does strike me, the CNN panels are always shocked when they hear some conservative message or someone corrects them. And Vance going on was important as a corrective. Now, should they continue to try to get a message across through legacy media? Of course not. There's so many other more immediate and wide-reaching channels and ways of doing that. But it's interesting to see them held to account. And again, they're waking up from a 4-year slumber here. And it's been a very unpleasant experience for them to confront both the results of this recent election and also the fact that the people they thought were on the same team with them have turned their attention to other outlets.
Yeah, look at CBS Sunday Morning. I don't know if you guys watched it this last Sunday morning, but their first segment was, are we in a constitutional crisis with Donald Trump being president? And it's just made me laugh because I'm like, you guys are going back to this shit? Like,
I know.
Are you kidding me? And it's like this deep segment about a constitutional crisis. And then they're narrated guys like, what is a constitutional crisis? Has America ever faced a constitutional crisis like we're in right now? I'm like, the guy's been there 5 weeks. Like, dial it back to crazies. And I do think there's an important point to go on there every once in a while and now just smack these people around. I don't think you need to service them like you used to 10 years ago, where every week you got to send a rep to CBS or ABC or NBC. I mean, it used to.
Same thing. And when that didn't happen, they just didn't have a playbook. They don't have a playbook. I agree with Ben. I don't think CBS is going to be out of business by December, but their numbers are going to keep contracting. Their echo chamber is going to get smaller and smaller. It's going to be like a little tin can, and they're not going to have an audience. And the fact of the matter is, if you run a business, you got to look at your bottom line. And we've seen what's happened to their bottom line. And what's going to happen? Well, places like Two-Way are going to come in and start eating their lunch with people that want to actually not hear the same thing that we've been hearing for the past 8 years. So in terms of Joy Reid, I agree with you. I think she's a really sour and even hateful person. And I don't think anybody wanted to keep listening to her anymore. I don't think that was a big...
I think the left was even tired of her.
Oh, completely. I mean, not just the anti-Semitism, but she's just been really that sort of sanctimonious. Like, remember that video she put up about 2 months ago? Like, okay, so, all right, so white ladies, like, we
yes. Yeah.
How are you serving the American people? How are you being a good citizen? And that is, I think, something when you start talking about Biden, and some of us were writing about his deficiencies and piled on for it. How are you serving the American people and yourself and your own sort of sense of decency to not call it like you see it? And
I'm serious. I think I agree with you, Nancy. And the point that I made the other day was when I was doing an interview, I said, do you guys realize that the media had lost its way so much that in the United States of America, I believe in my lifetime, the biggest political malfeasance that in the history of my lifetime is the media covering for an incapacitated president of the United States of America, and the cabinet covered for him and his staff. And no one was willing to in the mainstream media to even question it until we all saw him in that debate where he was obviously incapacitated. That is the biggest, I think, story that somebody should go back and do this kind of, hey, write the story of what the media was really doing. How were they bribed, right? Was it access? Like, hey, we're going to take care of you. You get a job here. You move up here as long as you don't ask these questions. Because it was not in the interest of a journalist to not report it unless you're a party hack. And I think that's what it boiled down to.
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I mean, I think that there were a lot. I know I was talking about it. I know the guys at the fifth column were talking about it. And then you get piled on. How dare you say that? I think there are a lot of reasons people don't do it. Like they've got a sick kid at home, or they got to take care of their parents, and they need to keep their job, or their newspaper is saying, "Look, we understand, but just know like what do." Yeah, do I think that is indecent? Do I think that that's not the job? Yes, I do. But I also think that people just kept wanting their team to win, and it's
tribalism.
You can't.
They also, by the way, can we be honest? They all hated Kamala Harris. I think they would have thrown him under the bus if they thought Kamala Harris could handle the job. I think that's also part of the story, is the media did not want her to become the president. And if they had any trust in her, if they genuinely thought she was going to be good for the party, or even just average, I think they would have then thrown Joe Biden under the bus years ago. But they couldn't stand her either. She was the Joy Reid of the White House.
Can I show you guys a video really quick? That's another great segue onto this, and I'm going to want number 5. So I was just scrolling on Twitter last night after I put my girls to bed, and I saw this video of Bill Maher and John Lovett. You probably guys don't know who John Lovett is. He's one of the Obama bros that hosts Pod Save America. A little reminder that Pod is not saving America, that those left Bernie bros who live in, by the way, I read that one of the hosts lives in like an $11 million mansion. Like, I guess podcasts pay on the left.
Man of the people.
Yes, exactly. And Beverly Hills. And I don't know where he lives, but I know it's in California. I want to show you this clip because I think this is, and I wanted to keep Nancy. Sorry, Nancy, stay in here when you come back. But I want to show you this video, and then I want to tell you why I don't understand what it's going to take for people on the left to get with what the American public wants and start accepting it. Because I actually think that people like John Lovett in this clip would rather die on the hill of their ideology than win elections. Let's play it.
Also, really important surgeries that people get for their heart, and they go wrong, and somebody dies. And nobody says we must stop the cardiologists. No one says we must stop the surgeons. We say,
That's your analogy?
You want the government to ban gender-affirming care for kids?
You want to lose every election. Just keep coming down on the side of parents coming in second in a who gets to decide what goes on with my kid contest.
So I just want to say this is the third rail that Nancy, Ben, Christine, and I all grabbed onto and didn't get canceled for, because I don't know if any of us have been canceled, but certainly experienced career ramifications for. And that's obviously the issue of biological men in sports and gender-affirming care, as the people on the left call it, for children under the age of 18, something I've been very public and vociferously against. Also, by the way, 79% of the American public agree with us. 79%. Yeah. It's a super majority.
It's a mandate.
It's a mandate. Why is this? I don't understand why this is religion to them. I don't understand why they don't say, you know what, parents should make decisions about their kids. You know what, maybe giving a surgery to a kid where they are sterilized and won't be able to have any sexual satisfaction, making that choice at the age of 13 maybe isn't a good idea. I don't understand it. Do you guys have any reaction to that clip? I was actually shocked to see it because I don't know. There's something about the way John Lovett was talking that made me really disappointed.
Well, Bill has been really good and consistent on this issue and also received a lot of flack for it. So I do admire him for continuing to stand by that. I would say the two main things is that on the left, this idea of radical extreme individualism now extend and identity. Self-identification has gone so far that it can incorporate the rules of biology. And I do say rules because there is nothing affirming about trying to argue that men and women can change their gender, change their sex. What they are doing is mutilating, in this case, children and sterilizing children. And history will judge them, I hope, as harshly and cruelly as they deserve to be judged. But the liberationist ideology behind this is of a piece with a lot of what's come out of the more progressive end of the left over the last, I would say, since the 1970s onward. Each new victory in a culture war requires a new front in that war. And this became very quickly. And in the face of actually a lot of skepticism by the LGB part of the community about the transgender part of it, that debate was happening within that community. And then the transgender ideological stuff took off, entered the schools, and we see the result. But I think it's not a force that's easily stopped because it requires a return to people standing up at risk to their reputation and their jobs in some points and saying, this is wrong. We don't do this to children. Men and women, there is such a thing as an XX and an XY chromosome. And, adults have a wider range of ways they can choose to live their lives, but we do not do this to children.
Is there anything else you guys want to add? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think this has become a litmus test for the radical left. And it is, I've never enjoyed watching Bill Maher more in my entire life. Like, I love his show now. I'd have a beer with the guy. I'd love to do his show because he's just, to watch the morph.
Me too.
I really would enjoy that.
I do not want to do his show, but
you would be great. You would be great. But I think the show that he did 10 years ago is so different now because he's no longer the leading edge of the left. He's now more mainstream and realizing how radical and how harmful.
Okay, let me just get in a little bit more here from Jesse.
The company's making its largest investment ever in the United States. $500 billion. 20,000 new jobs. A lot of that's going to red states, too. Even MSNBC has to admit Trump's winning.
Over the weekend, I read all these headlines, and the headlines were like, Trump suffers legal blows. Another one was, Trump get hit with unexpected loss. People watching those headlines, especially people who don't like Trump, are going to think Trump is getting his butt kicked. And then when he wins, invariably, he's going to win some of these cases. They're going to say, well, what happened to all the butt kicking?
Good headlines, bad headlines. The Trump team knows how to handle the media.
Mr. Secretary, why did you select an underqualified retired lieutenant general to be the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff?
I'm going to choose to reject your unqualified question. Who's next?
Hegseth's going to Guantanamo Bay tomorrow. The press won't like that either, but this administration really doesn't care.
Let me start out by saying this. If I offend anybody today, I don't give a
Okay, so Trump still winning, but it's going to come down to competence. It's very exciting to have Elon Musk tweeting 100 things overnight and waving a chainsaw around and appearing as though he's high on drugs. But it's going to come down to competence, execution. My biggest concerns about this Trump administration are corruption and incompetence. So right now, looks like he is winning, but his poll numbers are starting to come down. It's going to be up to the House of Representatives and the United States Senate to come together, pass a budget, provide funds to protect the border, to put forward some kind of modification of taxes. So in the final analysis, it comes down to how competent are you at reacting to events? How effective are you? And if you gut the DEI, you should expect an increase in competence. If you locate the DEI, you should be able to uncover just the worst people, the worst grifts, the worst things going on, the biggest charlatans, the biggest frauds, right? If you got affirmative action, you should have a boon in productivity. You should have a boon in cohesion. People will get along better, right? Companies will be more effective. Schools will be more effective. People will have more trust in the professions, in the institutions, if we can gut affirmative action. Unfortunately, our elite universities and our elite law schools, they're largely denying the Supreme Court ruling that says that you can't decide college admissions on the basis of race. But affirmative action and DEI steadily being hacked away from our government, from contractors that do business with the government, right? There's a healthy change in the vibe, in our culture. It should express itself in perhaps some kind of baby boon, in an increase in productivity, in an increase in social cohesion and social trust. People should become happier. When people become happier, they become more effective. They join, they volunteer, they get together with others, they embark on grand projects, right? So far, still seeing a lot more good things than bad. All right, let's skim through the chat. That Saturday night email from Elon was inspired by cocaine, says Elliot. I hope not. I did not speak of Kevin Michael Grace as though he passed away. I just spoke of him with respect of how difficult it is to set the temperature in a live stream and how he was able to do that due to the sheer force of his personality. George Washington, quote, "Truth will ultimately prevail where there is pain enough to bring it to light." Any predictions on Elon's life expectancy? So, a lot of troubling things with Elon Musk, a lot of fantastic things with Elon Musk. Yeah, I'll predict 80. But it wouldn't shock me if I woke up tomorrow and found out he was dead of an overdose. I'm also curious about Andrew Breitbart. Was there some kind of substance issue that was behind his early demise? Right, there was often a manic quality to Andrew that may have felt a little chemically inspired. Consider how crazy it is that the richest man in the world is working overtime for free to save the system that he is on top of. Well, Elon Musk looks like he's having a fantastic time, so he shouldn't need chemicals to enhance the experience. There isn't even a British Empire equivalent of Elon Musk, says the chat. A lot of negative things coming out about Ashley St. Clair, so she did not do herself any favors with her post-Valentine's Day drama tweets to Elon. Let's have a look at Kip's remarks. Peter Zion, the China doomer, now says that America, Europe, and the Middle East face imminent collapse. Really? Curtis Yarvin called the New York Times publisher the most powerful person in America, not Trump. Curtis Yarvin is frequently an idiot. I figure Stacey Abrams used that $2 billion to fix the gulf between her teeth or blow it on losing an election. I do wonder why Elon, aka Rocket Man, is spending his energy playing government accounting. That should help explain the gravity and unsustainability of the status quo that were driving us off a financial cliff. Well, everything's relative compared to which other nation. So our financial standing is pretty good when compared to other great powers. Man, I love the look of this stream, right? I was streaming at 30 frames per second and a 2500 bit rate. Now I've upped it to 60 frames per second at 8000 bit rate, and it looks so much sharper. All right, I'm now literally streaming in HD. I feel quantitative easing is coming because the economy has flattened out. I don't have any prediction. Then, when the boomers are gone, network TV news will fade away. Well, there'll always be a time and a place and a situation where we'll appreciate network news. I sure appreciated local news. I normally don't watch local news, but during the fires, the TV channels in Los Angeles did an amazing job. They flew in staff from all over America. They did a great job. So there's a time and a place when we should express our gratitude for the good things that people do, including even TV news, right? A 9/11 situation, you're going to want to probably tune into TV news. Trump is a charismatic dude. Kamala and Hillary, two of the most unlikable candidates I can remember. True. Okay, let me scroll down.
Don't care. The media in the back room, I'm sure I'll be reading a lot of hit pieces on me tomorrow. I don't give a what you think about me. I wake up every day for the last 4 years pissed off because the Reid administration took the most secure border in my lifetime and unsecured it on purpose, right? I worked for 6 presidents, starting with Ronald Reagan. Every president I ever worked for took steps to secure the border. Even Clinton and Obama took steps to secure the border.
Migrants used to get treated like celebrities under.
Wow. So Art Bell says Anthony Cumia has accepted an offer by the billionaire new owners of WABC, 50,000-watt New York City radio station, to do shows. That's fantastic. That's another sign of the vibe shift. Anthony Cumia is a genuinely funny man, generally a gifted radio performer. So good. I'm really glad.
The left has become and just out of touch with reality. But this is what happens when you let the crazies take over, is that there's this litmus test that you can't speak out. You can't say no. You don't have the ability in the left now. You lose your credibility in the Democratic Party, which is not really the Democratic Party anymore. I've been saying this for a long time. The Democratic Party is masquerading around as Democratic Party. They're really a combination of socialists, Marxists, and communists. The only reason why they say the word Democratic Party is because they still have to be palatable to the American people. But when you look at what they're advocating for, whether it's calling parents domestic terrorists and using the government to go after them for showing up for a school board meeting, or mandating that women must tolerate men in their locker room and taking their trophies and taking their scholarships. I mean, look at Martina Navratilova, for example. I was a college tennis player, so I look at her and what she accomplished in her career is amazing. Whether you agree with her lifestyle or not, she was an unbelievable trailblazer for women in sports, also coming out so early on as being openly gay. It cost her millions of dollars. She was exiled by many. She felt the pain of being at the forefront, just like Billie Jean King. She came out and said it is wrong to allow men to compete with women. And the LGBTQ community, which she led on, then tried to destroy her life and get her canceled and get her fired from being a
Right, it's overreach. Right, the left was on such a winning streak with regard to the culture wars, and they just overreached, pushed Americans into a corner, and Americans reacted. They said, enough. Right, little quick excerpts here from Decoding the Gurus.
Come on. They shared some pictures of threads of food and said, what are you talking about, Matt? What are you talking about? There's plenty of good food culture in Australia. You can get nice, Thai food, Vietnamese. There's lots of food in these fair lands.
And I think you detected, with the sharp-minded, acute person you are, you detected the logical flaw in their argument there, showing photographs of delicious Thai and Asian food.
I don't know if it was the issue, but it certainly didn't look authentically Australian. So yes, there's slightly an issue there. It would be kind of like defending Britain's food culture by displaying a fantastic sushi restaurant, which is like stolen valor. I feel. But of course, there are high-end restaurants everywhere. So but it's not your food culture. Well, it's a globalist world, Matt. It's a globalist world.
Well, we're not going to litigate it again. I set out to annoy people, and I succeeded. I do it in my personal life, and I got to do it here as well. But the thing is, Chris, is that yes, you could get some adequate Thai food, Chinese food, etc. in Australia. But the point is that not only is it much, much worse than the food that you would get in the originating country, it's even worse than the exported food that you would find in a place like the United States. Like if you go to a Thai restaurant in the United States, a median Thai restaurant in the United States, it will be way better than the median Thai restaurant in Australia, because Australians we have a pernicious effect on food. We demand that you take your fantastic food from your country and you dumb it down and make it bland and creamy and sugary and boring, and then we'll eat it. We force them to do it, Chris. I've seen it happen time and time again.
Okay, it's always funny when someone just rips on their own country. Okay, good times.
Test that he references However, it is a test.
Right, talking about Chris Langan, who's on a lot of different conservative podcasts, boasting about his 200 IQ and his cognitive theoretic model of the universe, right? Another grand unifying theory of everything, right? So this guy, Chris Langan, presents himself as an intellectual titan offering mathematical, social, religious, and philosophical insights so profound that mere mortals can barely grasp them.
Yes, that is highly criticized for being unreliable. It's also one that you self-administer without a time limit. Okay? And you're only supposed to take it once, and he has taken it multiple times. So even if you take that being a high IQ person means that you are worthy to listen to, Chris Langan's qualification as actually having a high IQ isn't really strongly demonstrated. It's a claim, but he doesn't actually have, like all these IQ tests that he can whip out showing, under controlled conditions, I scored, 180 on these Mensa-approved tests or whatever. He doesn't have that. He just has like a kind of, trust me, bro, right? I'm 180 IQ. So the premise that he should be someone that we...
So often one of the quickest tests of a charlatan is someone making exaggerated claims about themselves. And then the other quick test that you're dealing with a charlatan is when they've got this tale of grievance, right? It always comes back to the grievance.
He, because he has a high IQ, is questionable. And even that single claim to fame, that he is a high IQ person because of his scoring tests, like signifying this, is questionable. So I just want to put that out, Matt, that we are covering him because he's been interviewed as a high IQ person. But there's very little evidence that he actually is a high IQ person. So,
well, let people listen to Chris. And, people can make up their own mind, Chris.
No, but this is, look, I'm going to, but this is one of the things where, I was listening to it, and yes, I was getting annoyed or whatever, and I was like, right, but where does he come from? Where is the whole concept that he is the supreme high IQ guy from? And when you dig down into it, it's like a deck of cards, right? There isn't the thing which should be there. Which, because I could imagine there being some super high IQ person who is a conspiracy theorist, spoiler, and is into like a whole bunch of silly theories and these kind of things. Like, I can imagine that could happen. You could be a very smart person and end up in all these cul-de-sacs, right? Like the Nobel Prize winners who go on to endorse pseudoscience and all this kind of thing. But I'm saying, like, in his case, he doesn't even have the evidence for the IQ. But anyway, I'm just saying. And also, as somebody who deserves a kick up the arse for adding their own stamp to his legend is Malcolm Gladwell, the little science popularizing top science writer. He wrote a book called Outliers, The Story of Success. And in it, he used Chris Langan as an illustrative example of somebody who has a high IQ, but didn't succeed, as we'll go on to see.
I've got friends who are just all into charlatans, like Tony Robbins and Malcolm Gladwell. It's like these people are in my life, and I'm not going to rip on their mentors and their gurus, but just imagine hanging out with people who are so stupid that they venerate Malcolm Gladwell, Andrew Huberman, Joe Rogan, Malcolm Gladwell. I just,
They didn't end up in a high-paying job or a high-ranking scientist, and he uses it to show, to illustrate that it's also down to circumstances and cultural capital and all these kind of things. But that rests on the premise that he had the high IQ to begin. So Malcolm Gladwell, as people looked into it, basically didn't do very much fact-checking. It's just a good example, so he uses it. So Malcolm Gladwell helped to support.
Gladwell just is terrific at telling stories. He is just terrible at discerning truth. And why is he so terrible at discerning truth? Because telling a good story is far more important to him to telling the truth. Now, Malcolm Gladwell has become very successful, right, delivering schlock, just absolute junk, but in a very entertaining, compelling way that sells in airport bookstores, and people think that they're getting smarter. Like, I listened to audio versions of a whole bunch of his books because it was just so often talked about, and what a just total waste of time.
The myth that Chris Langan is a super high IQ person because he's featured in his book.
Yeah. Malcolm Gladwell's approach to narrative, big idea.
Peter Zeihan has genuine contributions. Peter Zeihan has genuine insights. Peter Zeihan has useful things to say. Peter Zeihan has innovative things to say. Peter Zeihan is worth listening to. All right, 50% nonsense, but there's probably 50% worth of quality. Right? You don't get 50%. You don't get 10, 20% quality with people like Malcolm Gladwell and Joe Rogan and these other useless commentators.
Storytelling in his books is a whole topic in and of itself.
We should cover him.
Yeah, we should. Yeah, look, that's right. Look, your point is well taken. IQ is somewhat dubious in the big bad world outside of...
In the way it's used, not as a specific measure.
In the way it's used. I know. And especially in terms of what it means when you start talking about 140, 150 above, right?
Oh, yeah.
It starts to become difficult to be very clear about what that means. But, even if it was totally...
Okay, that's absolute nonsense. The evidence is crystal clear that there is no level of IQ at which people don't, in general, accomplish significantly more. Right? There's no level of IQ where the benefits of having a high IQ just disappear.
Legitimate, there were no issues there. As you said, Chris Langan doesn't even have the evidence that he's even being scored as that by an IQ test. So, okay, that's something to file away in your back pocket as we go ahead and listen to this.
Yeah, so there's a thing called the mega test that he did. That is his claim to fame, but the mega test is highly criticized, right? So anyway, look it up at your own peril. But this interview, now, that was my introduction of Chris Langan. Let's hear Michael Knowles. And Michael Knowles is a conservative pundit, right? He's kind of in the Dave Rubin mold, or...
Yeah, that is an excellent analogy. Michael Knowles has all the intellectual contributions to make as a Dave Rubin, who is just, in intellectual terms, a zero.
Ben Shapiro mold. A conservative partisan activist, then, pundit. But
Ben Shapiro is genuinely funny at times, right? Ben Shapiro provides little more value than Dave Rubin and Michael Knowles.
Here's him introducing Chris Langan at the start of the interview.
I'm so excited that my first guest is Christopher Langan, the smartest man in the world. I do not say that as a subjective statement or to flatter Chris. I mean that in as technical a way as possible. Chris has one of, if not the highest IQ ever recorded, somewhere between 190, 195, and 210. And Chris is not here by way of some fancy, distinguished professorship at such and such brand name university, nor did Chris just get off of his private yacht out of the south of France and come here to lead his billion-dollar company. Chris came here from a farm in Missouri after a career as a bouncer at bars around New York. Chris, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me, Michael.
And then he has long tales of woe about how he was denied the success that was due him by all these nefarious forces out there. All right, Dan Bongino is going to be the number 2 guy at the FBI. This is hilarious.
I sued the state of Illinois. I sued the governor, and I said, if you don't stop, you're next. New York kept going. They were belligerent, sued New York, sued the governor. Not going to stop. So, you're going to be next if you're not watching what we're doing, and we will be successful.
We've never had a Justice Department like this. Bondi's running the show with Cash in charge of the FBI, and Cash just picked Dan Bongino to be the new deputy director of the FBI. Bongino's former NYPD and Secret Service, and he's ready to revamp the Bureau. Listen.
I can tell you right now, we are going to try our best. Every single thing I have in me, every single strand of DNA cell in my body is going to be dedicated towards keeping this homeland safe, no matter what. No matter what. That's my job. We're going to reestablish faith in this institution and the good people there doing their job, hitting the streets, developing sources. We'll have your back.
Michael Waltz is America's national security advisor. So when you hear that Bongino's coming on...
Okay, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.